100 years ago, the great American socialist and revolutionary Eugene Debs was thrown into a federal penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia, for denouncing the imperialist bloody effort to redivide the world in World War I. Debs was legendary for his opposition to imperialism and uncompromising view of the class struggle, winning him the support and admiration of millions of workers across the world. Debs declared in 1915, "I have no country to fight for. My country is the earth, and I am a citizen of the world. I am not a capitalist soldier. I am a proletarian revolutionist. I refuse to obey any command to fight from the ruling class, but I will not wait to be commanded to fight for the working class." A century later, as the U.S. wages war all over the world and prepares ever greater wars, WikiLeaks publisher and journalist Julian Assange has been thrown into a British jail cell for telling the truth about American war crimes. He potentially faces charges in the U.S. for violating the Espionage Act, the very same law used against Debs. The war to end war, World War I, in which millions of young workers were sent to their deaths, set the stage for an even bloodier imperialist conflict in World War II, which was another bid to redivide the world amongst competing capitalist cliques. The founder of our movement, Leon Trotsky, wrote in 1928 that in the period of crisis, the hegemony of the United States will operate more completely, more openly, and more ruthlessly than in the period of boom. This has been borne out as the American ruling class has seen its dominant economic position, which it held in the aftermath of World War II, slip away. The U.S. has waged a series of wars and military interventions in the nearly 75 years since the end of World War II. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union nearly 3 decades ago, it has instigated an unending and expanding bloodbath, beginning with the first Gulf War in Iraq in 1990-91 and the war in Yugoslavia. For 2 decades, in what Bush called the wars of the 21st century, the U.S. invaded and occupied Afghanistan in 2001, followed by Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Somalia. Entire societies have been destroyed, and at least 1 million people have been killed, with millions more transformed into refugees seeking safe haven for themselves and their families. Now, the so-called war on terror is being transformed into new great power conflict. In interstate strategic competition, not terrorism, is now the primary concern in U.S. national security, Pentagon war planners declared in last year's National Defense Strategy document. China and Russia, nuclear-armed powers, are squarely in the crosshairs of the United States and its imperialist allies in Europe, Japan, and Australia, threatening a catastrophe for humanity. The Trump administration's reckless imperialist provocation in Venezuela, spearheaded by the mad war hawk John Bolton, has been used to ratchet up tensions with Russia, China, and Iran. The historic conflict between the United States and Europe, particularly Germany, is again re-emerging. This new global conflict is being prepared with a massive military buildup around the world. Global military spending topped $1.8 trillion last year, the highest since the end of the Cold War. The U.S. once again led the way in 2018, spending $649 billion on its military, as much as the next 8 countries combined, accounting for more than a third of the world's military spending. This trend is set to continue. Trump has signed a $686 billion budget for 2019 and is requesting $718 billion for the Pentagon in 2020. The Congressional Budget Office projects that if current funding trends continue, the U.S. will spend $7 trillion on its military over the next decade, equivalent to the amount which will be spent on education, infrastructure, and public health programs combined. Education, healthcare, and Social Security are being starved of funding and wages suppressed so that resources can be poured into the machines of death and destruction. Trillions are to be squandered on aircraft carriers, fighter jets, hypersonic missiles, and nuclear bombs, while we are told there is no money to provide teachers with a high standard of living or provide every student with a free, high-quality education. This immense military buildup is being carried out with the support of all factions of the political establishment without even a whiff of protest. In fact, the Democratic Party's main critique of Trump has been from the right, demanding an ever greater military buildup and a more aggressive posture towards Russia, In the American working class, there is broad and overwhelming opposition to war. 16 years ago, there were mass demonstrations in the United States and around the world over the bloody, illegal operation in Iraq. Pseudo-left forces worked might and main to channel opposition to war behind the Democratic Party. And what was the outcome? Former President Obama, the pioneer of drone assassinations, including of American citizens, spent every day of his administration at war. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton laughed with glee at the murder of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011 and helped fuel the devastating regime change war in Syria. Self-proclaimed Democratic socialist Bernie Sanders, currently running to be the Democrats' presidential candidate in 2020, promised a foreign policy of drones, all that, and more when he ran for president in 2016. Assange and whistleblower Chelsea Manning are being persecuted, while those who committed war crimes remain in positions of power, free to plan and carry out new wars. But today, there's growing working class opposition all over the world, from the mass protests in Algeria and Sudan, to the Yellow Vest protests in France, and teacher strikes across the United States. American workers watched as their brothers and sisters across the border in Matamoros, Mexico, rose up in a powerful strike movement earlier this year. All around the world, workers are fighting over the same issues against the same transnational corporations. Just last week, 20,000 teachers marched in the southern state of North Carolina in defense of public education. One teacher told us that money was needed for mines, not landmines. There is immense anger over the wars which are being carried out in the name of the American people. The emergence of the international class struggle is breaking up all the efforts of the trade unions, Trump, and the Democrats to whip up American nationalism. This is the objective force which will break down the effort to throw workers into war with each other. This movement, still in its initial phases, must be armed with an international socialist program. The fight to put an end to war is impossible without fighting for socialism, and the fight to establish socialism is not possible without opposing war. Above all, the fight against imperialism must be rooted in the struggles of the working class. Criminality and gangsterism in foreign policy are the flip side of parasitism and speculation in economic life. The international working class must and will take up on its banner the fight against imperialist war as part of the struggle to overthrow the capitalist system and establish a society based on equality, international unity, and peace. Thank you.